Pretty much everyone is celebrating electric vehicles as a solution to climate change. The green transition, decarbonization, this is progress towards global warming.
How fast do we need electrified transport?
But here is what that conversation is leaving out. Bolivia holds the largest lithium reserves in the world, and Peru is one of the top producers for copper. These are the materials that make EVs possible. And the mines extracting them are right now disrupting water resources, displacing communities, and generating serious environmental damage across Latin America. So when someone celebrates the EV transition without mentioning any of all this, that is an incomplete climate take. But who has the fluency to tell all of this story? And that is the bilingual, bicultural climate experts who are systematically being left out of this conversation. And that's what this video is about. 3 times. That's how much more likely Latino workers are to die from heat on the job compared to non-Latino workers. That is the human face of global warming, and it barely exists in climate change conversation. Latinos are nearly 20% of the US population, and disproportionately, we are on the front lines of the climate crisis. 7% of US Hispanics say air pollution personally impacts their community, compared to 49% of non-Hispanic Americans. Latinos are 43% more likely than non-Hispanic whites to live in areas where climate change will reduce future labor hours. And by the way, this is not just a US story. Latin America as a whole contributes to only 8% of greenhouse emissions, and yet it is second most prone to climate disasters. Without urgent climate action, Latin America could have more than 17 million internal climate migrants by 2050. Climate change and migration are the same story. Environmental policy and labor rights are the same story. US and Latin America are the same story. But here's the thing is that you will never know that by watching the news, which then raises the question, right? Why not? Who controls the climate conversation and what is missing? Across 22 major digital news outlets in the United States, 0 Latino editors-in-chiefs. Across 22 major print newspapers, 0 Latino CEOs or publishers. Latinos are nearly 20% of the population. In California, Texas, and Florida, approaching 40% or more. And yet, we only make up 5% of news staff, only 4% of media management, and only 2% of daily news articles mention us, despite being 19% of the population. And that gap is larger than any minority group in the US. But here's what hit me hardest. Even Spanish language media, the outlets supposed to serve our communities, have this problem.
It's incredibly hot, you must stay inside!
Oh, we have the really hot salsa for you. Please, come in and eat.
When you think of climate emergency alerts, whether that's a hurricane warning, wildfire alerts, extreme heat advisories, are often only available in English, in communities where Spanish is the primary language. When information about global warming that could save your life only exists in a language you don't speak, then that's not just a media problem, that's a justice problem.
And frankly, even with climate change, life on Earth will still continue.
We should leverage the Spanish translation for market penetration.
Man, you all don't get it. Necesitamos más sazón si queremos hablar bien de esto.
So how did we get here? The answer has to do with who gets to define expertise and the blind spots that it creates. We talked about the lithium, so let me show you what it looks like on the ground. In the Atacama Desert, home to indigenous communities who have lived there for centuries, lithium extraction is drying up the water tables those communities have depended on for generations. In Cajamarca, Peru, one of the top copper producing regions in the world, mining operations have generated some of the most serious water contamination disputes in Latin America history. In the Bolivian Altiplano, communities are being displaced from the land their families have worked for generations so that the world can have cleaner cars. This is not an argument against the green transition, it is an argument for a complete one that accounts for the communities on both ends. And the people best positioned to tell this story, who have the language, the relationships, and the lived context on both sides, are the bilingual, bicultural climate experts who aren't being called. That is no coincidence, that is a structural problem, and it has a name. Now here's what the data looks like and why it matters for how climate policy gets made. There are climate experts that understand the full system. Bilingual researchers, policy analysts, journalists, community organizers, people who hold both realities at once. But those voices don't get calls from the network news. They're not on the climate panels. They are often not even cited in reports that shape policy. And so the consequences are that climate change policy gets designed without the full picture. The green transition gets celebrated as progress, while communities across Latin America bear the cost invisibly. $60 million people in the US and hundreds of millions across Latin America are most affected by the decisions that most exclude their voices. This isn't about fairness, it's about accuracy. Incomplete expertise produces incomplete solutions, and we are living with those incomplete solutions right now. So what actually needs to change? 3 things that need to change, and they're more specific than you might expect. First, media organizations need to understand that Latino communities are not a niche. 60 million people is not a niche. A community disproportionately bearing the consequences of global warming and supplying the raw materials for a green infrastructure deserves far more than 2% of the coverage. Number 2, número 2, the climate movement needs to define who a climate expert is and what progress against climate change actually looks like. Celebrating EVs without asking who loses water access for the lithium mine, that is not a complete take. Those aren't fringe questions, they are questions. Number 3, the climate movement needs bilingual voices, not as translators, not as community outreach, but as leaders, as climate experts, as the people setting the agenda and deciding what counts as progress in global warming. And here's the part that actually gives me hope, because the movement to close this gap is already real. Because this gap is real, the data on this climate representation is actually sobering. But the movement to close it, it's real too, and it's already happening. Outlets like Grist Fix and Fact Chequeado are building bilingual climate journalism from the ground up. Organizations like Hispanic Access Foundation and Green Latinos are advocating at a federal level with systems-level fluency. And those of us who exist in this space, who can think across the US and Latin America, who hold both the global warming research framework and their lived reality, we have to keep showing up. Because a conversation about climate change is also a conversation about power, and about who counts as a climate expert, about whose experience is treated as data and whose experience is treated as an anecdote. Bringing in bilingual, system-level climate voices isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. I am Alfredo Gonzalez Valenzuela, and this is Green Sonco, Sustainability, Resilience, and Community. If this meant something to you, share it, drop your thoughts below, and I will see you at the next one. Peace. Adios. Nos vemos.